Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Michele Glass here. Welcome to another chapter 10 video. We're going to talk a little bit here about anatomy. So we're going to have a few videos on anatomy. This one is focusing on kind of the big picture. So we're looking at what we can call the whole muscle. Oops. So we're thinking about the whole muscle, right? Okay, so the whole muscle is going to have what's described as mycia, and these are going to be connective tissues. This is a pattern we should start expecting in our organs. So we'll have connective tissues surrounding each organ that make that organ at once both separate from the other organs and structures of the body and also connects that organ to the rest of the body. So we had, remember, in the bone, periosteum and then endosteum as connective tissues. So we're going to see connective tissues in the muscle. We call them collectively mycia. And we're seeing here on the outermost layer, the epimysium. So remember, your prefix epi means above or upon. And the myo part of the word here, the my, is talking about muscle. So the epimysium we can talk about as this outermost layer. It surrounds the whole muscle. This is the one that's making that muscle a separate structure. So allowing you to actually, if you wanted to do a dissection of that particular muscle. So it's making it a separate structure from the rest of the body. The next mycia for us to look at is called the perimysium. So peri means around. So the perimysium is going to surround what are called fascicles. Now let's take a look here at the fascicle. So the fascicle we can define as a bundle of muscle fibers. And it's important to start translating in your mind that when we say muscle fiber, what we're talking about is a muscle cell. So a muscle fascicle is going to be a bundle of muscle fibers. And what you should see is a lot of cylinders. So very often your whole muscle has a very rounded or cylindrical shape. It's made up of these cylindrical shaped muscle fascicles. So we're seeing the whole muscle often has this kind of cylindrical shape, and then you have a bunch of smaller cylinders inside, and those cylinders are the muscle fascicles. And each one of those cylinders is made up of the muscle fiber, which we're translating in our mind to be a muscle cell. So it's kind of like a big cylinder and then a bunch of smaller cylinders and then even smaller cylinders as we go through. So it's very often what we see. So the perimysium, peri is around, it's around the fascicle. It's around the fascicle. It's going to help hold blood vessels and nerves as we're getting deeper into this whole muscle, okay? It's going to help surround blood vessels and nerves. So in terms of our mycia, we have the epimysium on the outermost layer. Then we have the perimysium, which is surrounding each one of those fascicles. And then the third mycia we have is called endomysium. And so we should be recognizing that prefix endo as more interior. And so this is the innermost mycia. This is going to enclose the muscle fiber. And remember, we're translating fiber here in our mind. Oh, that means muscle cell. So the endosteum is the innermost. It's enclosing the muscle fiber, which tells us muscle cell. And it's going to actually contain the ECF, which remember means extracellular fluid. So you're going to have extracellular fluid in between the endomysium and the actual muscle fiber, actual muscle cell. And so again, we're seeing cylinders upon cylinders upon cylinders. So very often the whole muscle is looking like one big cylindrical shaped structure made up of a bunch of smaller cylinders. Kind of packing in between those smaller cylinders, which are the muscle fascicles, we have the perimysium. So if your whole muscle is like the cooler, and then you have your Coke cans inside the cooler, and then you have the ice packed around, maybe that ice would be the perimysium. If we're using that analogy, maybe we could pretend that the actual can is the endomysium, and inside that you would have the extracellular fluid and you would have the muscle fiber. Notice we have our muscle fibers looking very cylindrical in shape as well. And remember, this is our muscle cell. So why in the world do we have to learn this new name? Why is it called a muscle fiber and not just simply a muscle cell? And that has to do with how super duper long it is. It has to do with how super duper long it is. So our muscle cells are going to be cylindrical in shape, and they're going to be long, and they're about 30 centimeters long, or almost 12 inches. They can run to be that long. So that's much longer, bigger than any kind of cell that we sort of introduced in chapter 3. Notice you have inside the endomysium, remember that's holding the extracellular fluid and that's holding the cell itself. We have this additional cell type that's listed for us here, and that's called the satellite cell. Our satellite cell is going to be our stem cell, and it's going to be involved in the growth and the repair of our muscles. So we do have a stem cell that's embedded in a whole muscle. It's called the satellite cell, or you can call it a myosatellite cell. That's a single word. We'll see that inside the endomysium, right there close to those muscle fibers. We're going to go into some more detail on the muscle fiber as we move into the next video. So I'm going to save some of that for the next conversation. But before I leave here, I do want to revisit this idea of the mycia of the connective tissue. Remember, the mycia is the epimysium, perimysium, and endomysium, which we see the full length of the muscle fiber, and we see it embedded on the outside, packed in between those fascicles, and on the very inside of the muscle, enclosing each one of those cells. So this is quite a lot of connective tissue at all these different layers of the whole muscle. We're going to see that the mycia becomes mycia. Remember, these are going to be your epimysium, perimysium, endomysium, so we're going to see these connective tissues, the mycia, the epimysium, perimysium, and endomysium, connecting into the tendon, So the mycia is going to connect into the tendon. And we've talked about the tendon as connecting muscle to bone. If our tendon is flat, it's called an aponeurosis. So what we typically see is these connective tissues, because they are these important layers of the muscle at all three kind of outermost, wrapping around fascicles, wrapping around cells. we'll see that pretty much they take on the shape of the whole muscle. So if the muscle's flat, like the frontalis muscle, then the tendon coming off of that would be flat as well. And so we talk about a broad, flat tendon as an aponeurosis. So the tendon becomes continuous with the mycia. The tendon becomes continuous with the mycia. And then what we see is that the tendon or the aponeurosis is going to connect into the periosteum. And the periosteum, remember, is that outermost connective tissue on the long bone. So it's going all the way, the whole length of the long bone. So we can imagine then these connections between the muscle and the bone to be extremely strong. When we're looking at these connective tissues, you should remember that it's collagen fibers, which is a really strong protein, and elastic fibers, which is given a little bit of stretchiness. And then we also see that the mycia can connect into what's called the fascia. And the fascia is going to be connective tissue between the skin and the bone. So mycia is going to connect into tendons, it's going to connect into the aponeurosis, or it's going to connect into the fascia. And we see also that the mycia ultimately is connecting into the periosteum of the bone. Okay, that's it for this video. Stay tuned for a discussion on the muscle fiber, which remembers the cell. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.